Hi, I'm Thaddeus McNamara, and until recently, my role was an unauthorized asset acquisition officer working across all of the brands that you know, both domestically and internationally, moving goods from their stock to the second, third, and fourth tier markets. Also known as an unplanned merchandise retail redistributor, what I did was allow things that you would have liked to have had to be available to you, despite the fact that the market had priced you out of being able to buy them. You can thank me later. So because of this particular propensity to redistribute merchandise in an impromptu manner, I learned a lot about RFID. Now, this isn't just used in inventory and merchandise retail space, but it's also pervasive through most of our life today. RFID tags are so pervasive that you probably don't realize how many you're carrying around at any given moment in time. So this video may help you understand the many ways that these tags are being used to track and protect you right now. So back around 1945, there was a bloke named Theremin. Yeah, that guy. The same guy who made the woo noise theremin thing. But Mr. Theremin had also done some magnetic induction investigations and identified the opportunity to be able to use a remote power source and an inbuilt antenna to be able to have a small object transmit a piece of data back to the... So how does an RFID work? You have three basic ideas. You've got a passive one, which is what most of the ones we're talking about today operate on. They're essentially a small chip that all it does is send a radio frequency piece of information, a little bit of data, but that radio chip does so when it's powered on. When you get a transceiver close enough to it, it powers up the antenna and the chip sends a piece of data. You also have semi-passive ones, which are more or less the same idea, only they have a little bit more complexity in what the circuit is doing. But as soon as something comes into range and powers the antenna on, the semi-active circuit, i.e. it's running a battery, sends a piece of data back that can be a little bit more complicated than a purely passive version. And finally, you have active RFID, which is where it's active. There's power, there's batteries, it's broadcasting. I don't even want to... fuck that. It's not that interesting. Let's go with all the other ones that we're talking about right now. They're a lot more interesting. If it's semi-passive or passive, either way, doesn't matter. Let's go into the deeper side of how they work. There's an antenna, which is like a little ring or a pad of some description. When a transceiver, the thing that wants to read the RFID, comes within range of it, it activates... You ever see that one science experiment where they had a really long piece of coat hanger wire and they soldered it to the bottom of a light bulb, and then they had like a radio transmitter that was sending energy, and the antenna, i.e. long piece of wire, picked up all that energy and it was enough to turn the light bulb on? It's that. They turn on the chip, or the RFID, through electricity into the air, and be it some bars at your local retail store, or alternatively a handheld transceiver. That little chip goes, hey, and chirps a very small packet of data, which the transceiver picks up on. If this is activated by something like fluorescent lights, which can happen, and nothing's there to hear it, then it just chirps out to the world and no harm is done. A semi-passive version of this is the same, but it can think a little bit about the chirp. So it receives a amount of power from a transceiver. Based on that amount of power, it can make a decision about what it chirps back. So if it receives little power, it gives chirp A. If it receives a lot of power, it chirps B. What could go wrong? The active RFID, which I mentioned earlier, is a little bit different because it's actually got its own power source, not just to do some thinking when something reaches out to it, but it can actually broadcast. They might be creepiest of all. Or the least creepy. Hard to tell right here. So anyway, old mate Theremin comes up with this idea where that he can use the induction power that also makes noises on his wire stick thingy to be able to wake up or activate some sort of circuit that sends something back. And he can fuck off. Who actually wants to play the theremin? Martin. Jeff Martin from the Tea Party. He plays the theremin on stage. Let's bear in mind that it was a Soviet espionage tool when he first came up with what is essentially the first RFIDs. But other than the guy who made the wire on a stick theremin thing happen, there was a dude named Stockman who in 1948 had a paper called something to the effect of reflected radio waves through blah blah blah. But the idea was clear, that you could use radio waves to activate something at the other end and have it transmit something back. So in 1948 we essentially had the first RFID. 1973 saw the first patent for this technology in some form or another. By that point in time, Thomas Edison didn't take any ownership of it, even though he was well known for stealing all of the patents, allegedly. By 1973, he was fucking dead. Between 1948, 1973, whatever it was, lots of things happened. But it was ultimately 1990 odd, so only a bull's raw from where we stand today, that a usable RFID commercial product came to be. It was a ultra high frequency RFID tag, and it had gone through all the usual suspects. Los Alamos. Like, at this point in time, pretty much all the tech bros used to just, like, circle jerk each other with all the technologies. 1990, we now have an RFID that uses ultra high frequency, and what are we going to use it for? Well, obviously, posting things. We're going to use it in the post office. Why wouldn't we? Actually, I entirely lie. It was used for vehicles and livestock tracking. We've now gotten through to the modern day, roughly the modern day. I'm not going to get too much further in the history of things. I don't want to. I genuinely don't want to waste too much time in the history of how we came to have RFIDs, because how they're used, the breadth and width and girth of their applications is a lot more interesting than some dickhead working out that if you had a light bulb on a wire, it would light up so you can also... Let's talk about how they're being used, because that starts getting very fucky very quickly. Actually, before we go down the rabbit hole of what they're embedded in these days, which is massive and terrifying, I'll just give you a little bit of an idea of specs. Based on a passive RFID, it can be active anywhere from a few centimeters all the way out to roughly 10 meters. An active RFID tag, maybe 100 meters. And in any case, let's assume a passive ID tag, it can store about 10,000 characters on it, low end. If you're using UTF-8 encoding and assuming an average of 10 kilobytes worth of data being able to be embedded or stored in the RFID, that means something around about 128 to the power of 10,000 and 240 or something to that effect. That's how many unique tags can be created using 10 kilobytes. So why do I speak to RFIDs like they're so scary? They're a great technology. They absolutely help with warehouse management. You can have an RFID on every single box. You can get within roughly 10 meters of the box and identify exactly where it is. And these are utterly required if you're going to do automated robot-driven warehousing, which is probably better than what Amazon is doing to its staff members. They're probably better off not having jobs given the way they're treated. That is only part of it. You can put these tags on anything. Anything. But Thaddeus, you say, surely you can't put an RFID on anything. They're a sticker or a chip, right? And I say, no, you're absolutely wrong. So if I just reach down here for a minute, hang on. Oh, there we go. This is a pube. The smallest RFID that has been developed to date is roughly the same height and width as my pube, 0.05 millimeters, because I've got some bushy pubes. Now, if you can imagine having a passive ID that can be read from 10 meters away, that is literally smaller in all dimensions than this little fucking piece of hair here, and not feel that that could be attached to you, fed to you, or concealed somehow on something without your permission or knowledge, I understand that that pube was very hard to see on camera. But I assure you, I pulled one out of the forest. So you have a mathematically improbably large number of RFID tags that are smaller than my pubes and can be put on fucking everything and read from about 10 meters away. I wouldn't be surprised if Coles and Woolworths, in addition to having theft control preventative gates, they fucking suck. But I would not be surprised if they were also, But that's a little conspiratorial. And I've made this very heavy off the get-go. So let's back that out and let's talk about some of the fun stuff that RFIDs are good for. You might remember from the currency cash video that I made that I talked about these plastic little fun tokens. This has an RFID tag in it. Casinos are absolutely and unquestionably using RFIDs to track where you're gambling, how you're gambling, when you walk in and when you walk out. I have no doubt the Crown knows that this is not on their premises. And there is a report that they can run, the exact number of this particular chip, and the fact that it left their premises and hasn't come back yet. Something that you're probably far more familiar with is the idea of having to tap in or out of either your workplace or your home car park. These particular RFIDs are fobs. They're small, you carry them around on your keyrings, and generally speaking, the transponders associated with them require you rub them very closely against them in order for them to work. They are a passive RFID, but could potentially be read from quite a fair distance away. In a pop culture reference, which we always like to include when we can, Mr. Robot, which was highly unbelievable because he had friends and sex, but otherwise did a good job of typifying the average hacker, or did it? Mr. Robot did have some scenes where he was able to, using a pretty cheap piece of kit that he bought from AliExpress, capture RFID token numbers from quite some distance away as people visited a cafe that he was also at. That's actually not bullshit. Nowadays, if you want to get RFID type access tokens, you do have the option of getting them in an encrypted format. However, that would require your building to upgrade all of their readers, and each one of the tokens costs around about 3,000% more. So clearly, most of them aren't The more interesting part of this is that most of these little tags are encoded sequentially using an unencrypted number. So all you need to do is capture one of them and then sit there and look at where you think the starting number of the sequence is. If you can guess that number 1 or number 100 or number 1000, whatever it is, the starting number of the sequence is, there's a good chance that that's actually the master key. So if you do happen to be able to capture the RFID tag of a particular building and know its sequence well enough to guess where the 0 number is, it's fairly likely that that 0 tag will open every lock in the building. And let's not forget, I mean, I'm literally one day after the whole CrowdStrike thing filming this. Let's not forget, IT people are fucking lazy. Also, I know how to boot a computer into safe mode and delete one file without actually destroying a computer. So pretty much anyone who has that level of skill this week is apparently a desktop support operator. Fuck you, CrowdStrike. A couple of years ago, I'm talking quite a few actually now I think about it, a bloke came up to me in a workplace environment and offered me to bump him. Or at least so I thought. What he was actually doing was showing off that he had an RFID-enabled ring on his finger. One side of the ring was his virtual business card. The other side of his ring was in fact the access tag, like we were talking about a moment ago, to his apartment. So clearly, the next opportunity I had, I grabbed my mobile phone. Let's say I use my mobile phone. Let's keep it at that. We don't want to incriminate ourselves too much. But at any rate, I scanned his ring and yes, I got his V card because, wait, that's so fucking off. Anyway, I scanned his ring. So anyway, I used a device and scanned his ring and therefore I was able to open his back door. Globally, there's also been a big push to improve the technology and verification protocols around passports. Now, this one isn't mine. This is totally my passport, and let's not go into that any further. It is in fact embedded with an RFID tag, which means that when somebody steals my passport, or vice versa, because passports are probably the most sensitive document on the earth at the moment, when that particular document is verified, it also has a digital verification step, which will bring up a agreed record between countries that know and share the information between them, so that even if I do try to use this bloke's passport and I've managed to change the photo in it to fuck off to a Belize. John McAfee liked Belize. Well, actually, he really didn't like Belize in the end. But when I fuck off out of the country on someone else's passport, there's a very good chance that them scanning the RFID in it is going to turn up that it's not mine and that I shouldn't be using it. One of the more terrifying things about RFID tagging and scanning is that it's actually fairly trivial to put a very small RFID tag on someone's person or in their possessions, a couple of mobile 3G enabled transponders around, which allows for a degree of stalking. In the same regard, I'm not a huge fan of things like iTags or similar. We're not at the point in time where they are not misusable. I do like the process that they're going through for the iTags to be able to go, hey, there's an iTag near me which I don't know about and it shouldn't be there, fucking disable it. But it's always going to be a balance in between your neighbour's car keys and your violent ex-husband's attempt to follow you around. This is more concerning than most other forms of technology out there. The abuse potential is absolutely horrendous. And RFIDs, if you know what you're doing, if you want to actually spend the time, they are actually pretty close to the same. It's not expensive to get transponders. It's almost trivial to be able to read them from far away. An active RFID has about 100 meters range. So even if you're not going down the path of using those smart tags or similar, if you have an idea of the patterns that the people you're trying to fucking harass use, you can zero in pretty easily. It's fucking horrendous. And again, smaller than a pube for a passive tag. No one's gonna find my pubes in their purse. I'm sorry. So sorry. Another example of where these tags have gotten someone into trouble is that there was a couple of companies that decided it was a good idea to put discrete readers around their workplace campuses. Also put RFID tags in their employee ID cards. It was one thing to have them scan in and out as they entered the building and exited it. I don't think anyone can argue that access control is a reasonable use for an RFID. Putting them in other places around the workplace without the consent of the employee and tracking their movements without disclosing it to the employee is fucking bullshit. At the core of it all, back in the 90s when they came up with RFIDs, it was all about tracking vehicles in and out of particular sites, and it was all about tracking packages through. For instance, if I buy something online today, it has an RFID sticker or tag placed within it. Because of the tracking tag, I can see it being, without human intervention, see it moving through different gates and different checkpoints, all the way from wherever I bought it, probably China, knowing my cheap AliExpress fucking addiction, all the way through until I see that it is attempted to be delivered to my house, which it wasn't, and then Perth again, Cairns, Hobart, and then got returned to fucking China. I can see the RFID knows where it is. Why don't you know where I am? It's written on the fucking box. The body hacking / transhuman community also likes stuffing RFIDs under their skin as a way of gaining some form of credit. A notable example of this, and an Australian like myself, Meow Ludo Disco Gamma Meow Meow. He is known globally and has managed to get TEDx talks because of the fact that he got some RFIDs stuffed into his body voluntarily. What's notable about this is that he had the Opal card, which is essentially a tap and go type card for the public transport system, RFID cloned, and then he stuffed it into his body. In this particular instance, it put him afoul of the law because you needed to be able to present the actual physical card, legally speaking, in order to be able to prove that you're the holder of it. As far as the concept of transhumanism goes, stuffing RFIDs in under your skin and then tapping on and tapping off of a tram or a bus is apparently quite popular. I have to be a little bit reasonable. Good old Meow Meow, he is a very eloquent speaker and seems pretty down to earth. RFID as body hacking is apparently quite popular, second only to sticking magnets under your skin. Your pet can be found far, far away from where you are because RFIDs are inserted into the pet's, they're about the size of a grain of rice, into the pet's neck via a veterinary professional, usually. But it does mean that if your dog or cat is found 4 suburbs over, or in the case of one dog, it was found like 4 states over, they can be scanned and it's like, oh no, we know whose dog this is fine, let's send it back. But in the case of the one dog that was 4 states over, the different states in Australia didn't share a common database at that point in time. Eventually they worked it out. They did, in fact, find out that it was tagged with one of the eastern states' RFIDs, and even though it was found in one of the middle western states, they got Papa home. And we like that. Who doesn't like a good story about a dog finding its way home? Probably one of the most controversial things that was ever done with RFIDs was that one particular aged care support home wanted to inject dementia patients with them so that they could work out when they'd left the building, and later on, if they were found on the side of the road, they could scan them like your pet. Actually, that's probably not a bad use case. Even if I don't end up speaking gibberish, it's probably not a bad thing if I got tagged with an RFID to tell people who I was, because I frequently can't speak clearly. These videos are a testament to that. So I guess in conclusion, more RFIDs on the condition you're not an estranged husband trying to track down a woman. I think that's reasonable. I'm Thaddeus McNamara, and I'm whacking on.